My parents were absolutely convinced the gym was no place for a 17-year-old girl, and no amount of reasoning, pleading, or logical arguments could change their minds on this matter that they'd somehow decided was non-negotiable. At 17, I was the only athlete on my entire track team who wasn't allowed to strength train, which made me stand out for all the wrong reasons and filled me with a constant sense of embarrassment and frustration every single practice as I watched my teammates head off to the weight room together while I packed up my bag alone. While my teammates were getting faster and stronger every single week, hitting new personal records and celebrating their progress together in the weight room after practice, posting photos of their achievements and talking excitedly about their gains, I was stuck doing bodyweight exercises in my cramped bedroom with nothing but a thin yoga mat my mom had bought on sale from Target 3 years ago. The same mat that was now starting to tear at the edges from overuse and had permanently lost its cushioning. The frustration was absolutely unbearable, like a constant weight pressing down on my chest that got heavier with each passing day, making it hard to focus on anything else. Every single time I brought up needing a gym membership, trying different approaches and angles to convince them, coming armed with research and statistics about injury prevention and athletic development, my dad would launch into his well-rehearsed speech that I'd heard so many times I could recite it word for word in my sleep. "There are too many creepy guys just showing off and hitting on young girls," he'd say with this serious, protective tone that made it clear the conversation was over before it even began, his arms crossed and his jaw set. "Those places are meat markets, not fitness centers, and I'm not going to let my daughter be objectified by a bunch of narcissistic meatheads who are just there to stare at women in yoga pants." Mom would immediately jump in with her own ammunition, pulling out stories she'd read on Facebook or heard from her friends at book club, her phone already in hand to show me screenshots of fear-mongering articles. "Did you see that article about the girl who got followed home from the gym?" she'd ask, her voice rising with genuine concern and fear. Or she'd bring up something even more dramatic. "A trainer at that franchise location got arrested for harassment last year. It was all over the news. And you think I'm going to let you walk into that environment where predators have access to vulnerable young women?" My coach kept asking why I wasn't following the team strength program, her frustration becoming more obvious as the weeks went by and my performance plateaued while everyone else improved by leaps and bounds. She'd spent hours writing out this whole detailed periodized training plan with progressive overload and specific rep schemes designed to make us peak at championships, complete with deload weeks and intensity cycles. But I had to keep making increasingly weak excuses about why my times weren't improving, and why I looked exactly the same while my teammates were visibly getting more muscular and powerful, their bodies transforming before my eyes. I begged them constantly, trying every possible argument I could think of, approaching it from safety angles, from academic angles, from health perspectives. "Please just let me try it for 1 month, just 30 days to see if it helps my performance," I'd plead desperately. "I'll only go during women's hours. I'll stay in the women's section where there are female trainers. I'll never talk to anyone or make eye contact. I promise I'll be careful." But Dad would just shake his head firmly, cross his arms over his chest in that immovable stance, and say in that final tone that meant the discussion was over, and I shouldn't bring it up again, "We're protecting you from that toxic culture, and someday when you're older you'll understand and thank us for keeping you safe from those environments." Meanwhile, girls I used to beat easily in races, girls who would finish several seconds behind me just last season and would congratulate me at the finish line, were now passing me like I was standing still, leaving me in the dust, and college scouts who had shown serious interest in me as a sophomore, who had emailed my coach and asked for my race schedule, had completely stopped considering me at all. Their emails and calls drying up as my rankings dropped, and I fell further and further behind the competition. I was venting to my best friend Kimberly after practice one particularly frustrating day, after I'd finished dead last in a workout that I should have dominated, about how much I was starting to genuinely resent my parents for holding me back from my potential and sabotaging my future. "They think every single guy there is some predator just waiting to harass me, like I can't handle myself or use common sense or recognize danger," I said, my voice breaking with frustration and my eyes stinging with tears I was trying to hold back. Kimberly just stared at me like I'd suddenly grown a second head, her eyes wide with complete disbelief at what she was hearing. "That's absolutely insane and completely unreasonable," she said firmly, shaking her head. "You need strength training for track. Everyone knows that. It's not optional at this level of competition. What do they expect you to do? Just fail horribly and give up on your college dreams and athletic scholarship opportunities?" Her mom overheard us talking from the kitchen and walked over to the couch where we were sitting, and I thought I was about to get another adult lecture about respecting my parents' wishes and being patient and understanding their perspective. But instead, she looked at me with genuine sympathy and understanding, her expression soft and concerned, and said something that would change everything and set me on a path I never expected. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life, and I'm not going to stand by and watch them sabotage your future over irrational fears that have no basis in reality." The very next day during pickup, when she came to get Kimberly after practice and I was waiting for my own mom to arrive, she secretly handed me a key fob, pressing it into my palm and closing my fingers around it while glancing around to make sure no one was watching. I added you to our family gym membership, she whispered conspiratorially, while my mom was distracted talking to another parent across the parking lot about some school fundraiser. Tell your parents you're studying at the library with Kimberly before school, early morning study sessions for your AP classes, and we'll make this work without them ever knowing. Oh my God. I couldn't believe she was actually doing this for me, risking her relationship with my parents. I hugged her tightly and thanked her profusely, my voice thick with gratitude and relief, promising to keep this secret no matter what, and to never let them find out what we were doing. For the next 3 months, Kimberly picked me up every single morning at 5:30 a.m. sharp, her headlights flashing in my driveway as I snuck out quietly, for our supposed library study sessions, when we were actually going to the gym to train with the team's actual program, finally doing the squats and deadlifts and power cleans I'd been missing out on for so long. I was building real muscle for the first time in my life, my legs getting stronger and more defined with visible quad separation, my back developing that athletic V shape, and I was finally starting to catch up with the rest of the team, my times dropping week after week as my power and explosiveness improved dramatically. I even kept a full set of gym clothes hidden in Kimberly's car in a spare duffel bag tucked under the passenger seat, along with deodorant and body spray, and always showered thoroughly at the gym before returning home so my parents would never suspect a thing or smell the telltale scent of the gym on me, that mixture of rubber and cleaning products and sweat. Then one Saturday afternoon in late spring, my secret rebellion would end up paying off in the most unexpected and dramatic way possible, proving that everything I'd been doing was not just about athletics, but about being prepared for real life. I was upstairs in my room doing my usual bodyweight exercises, going through the motions of lunges and planks and push-ups that felt laughably easy now compared to the weights I'd been lifting, when I heard my mom's car pull up in the driveway with the familiar sound of tires on gravel. She'd been out grocery shopping at Costco for what must have been hours, and was carrying in those massive, overstuffed reusable bags that she'd loaded up with what looked like a week's worth of food for our family of 4. She'd always stubbornly refused to make 2 trips, insisting it was more efficient to carry everything at once no matter how heavy it was, viewing it as some kind of personal challenge to her strength and independence, and today was no exception to her usual pattern of overloading herself. Through my bedroom window, I watched her struggle with the bags, at least 6 of them hanging from her arms, each one looking like it weighed at least 30 or 40 pounds, bulging with cans and bottles and produce and packages. I heard the front door creak open, then her footsteps coming through the entryway, heavier than usual with the weight she was carrying, then a sound I'll never forget for the rest of my life, a sound that will haunt me. A sharp, sickening crack followed immediately by a cry of pure, raw agony that made my blood run cold and my heart stop. I flew down the stairs 2 at a time, my heart pounding with sudden terror and adrenaline already flooding my system, to find Mom collapsed on the kitchen floor in a crumpled heap, groceries scattered everywhere around her like debris from an explosion. Her face was completely red and contorted in pain, twisted in an expression I'd never seen before, and she was crying like someone had died, like it was someone's funeral, and she'd just lost everything that mattered to her. My back, she whispered, barely able to speak through the waves of pain that were clearly washing over her in agonizing cycles. Something popped. Something went terribly wrong inside me. I can't move at all. I'm completely stuck. Her whole body was trembling violently, shaking like a leaf in a windstorm. Every tiny movement, even just breathing or trying to adjust her position slightly, made her cry out in agony that pierced through me. I tried to help her up the normal way at first, not understanding the severity of what had happened, grabbing her hands and trying to pull her up to her feet the way I'd helped her up countless times before, but she screamed so loud and so desperately I jumped back in shock, terrified I'd hurt her worse. "Don't pull my arms like that. Please, please, it hurts so bad I can't stand it. You're making it worse." She was sobbing now, the kind of deep, desperate crying where you can't even catch your breath between sobs, where your whole body heaves and shudders with the force of it. Something in me just completely shifted when I realized my mom needed immediate help and couldn't wait for an ambulance that would take 20 minutes or more to arrive. The adrenaline hit me like a physical wave, flooding my system with strength and clarity. Without even consciously realizing what I was doing or thinking it through, operating purely on instinct and training, I dropped into a perfect squat position just like I'd practiced hundreds of times over the past 3 months, slid my arms carefully under Mom's body, engaged my core and my legs exactly like my coach had taught me, and lifted her up in my arms with barely any effort at all, her weight feeling manageable and controlled, maybe 140 pounds that felt light. "Just hold on, Mom. Stay calm and breathe. I'll take you to the hospital right now." Mom gasped, her eyes going wide as she looked at me in complete shock and confusion, her pain momentarily forgotten in her surprise. "How did you just lift me like that? Like I weigh nothing at all." But I was already moving purposefully through the house, not stopping to explain or answer questions, keeping my back perfectly straight, breathing steadily and controlled, carrying her through the house like I'd carried that 150-pound barbell just last week during my heavy squat session, my legs stable and strong, I set her down as gently as possible in the back seat of her car, careful not to jostle her injured back or cause any sudden movements, and drove straight to the emergency room as fast as I safely could while obeying traffic laws, with her bewildered face watching me in the rearview mirror the entire time, questions and confusion written all over her expression even through her pain. I pulled up directly to the emergency entrance and ran inside for a wheelchair, nearly colliding with someone in my panic and urgency. A nurse helped me carefully transfer Mom from the car while she winced and gasped with every tiny movement, even the smallest shifts causing her obvious pain that made her breath hitch. We wheeled her straight in, and they took her back immediately for x-rays and an MRI, the urgency in everyone's movements making my anxiety spike and my hands shake. About an hour later, after I'd been sitting in the waiting room trying not to panic and imagining worst-case scenarios, a doctor in blue scrubs came out and brought me back to where Mom was lying on a gurney, her face pale and drawn with pain and fear. "Your mother has a severely herniated disc," he said seriously, looking at both of us with a grave expression that made my stomach drop. The compression on her spinal nerves was severe and dangerous. If she'd stayed on that floor much longer without treatment, we'd be looking at potential permanent nerve damage, possibly even paralysis from the waist down. Mom's face went completely white, all the color draining out instantly. "I could have been paralyzed for life?" The doctor nodded solemnly. "You're very lucky you got here when you did. Every single minute matters with this type of acute spinal injury." After the doctor left to write up orders for treatment, she turned to me slowly and asked the question I'd been dreading. "Have you been going to the gym?" I nodded, unable to lie anymore, and her only response was, "Good. But that's not where it ends." Update. About 20 minutes passed while I sat beside Mom's gurney, both of us quiet and processing everything the doctor had said, when I heard quick footsteps in the hallway, and Dad burst through the door looking completely panicked. His face was pale and sweaty like he'd been running, and he went straight to Mom's side without even noticing me at first. He grabbed her hand and started asking rapid questions about what happened and if she was okay and what the doctor said. Mom squeezed his hand back and told him she herniated a disc badly, but she was going to be fine because I got her here in time. The doctor came back in right then to check on Mom's pain medication, and Dad asked him to explain everything again from the beginning. The doctor went through the whole diagnosis again, talking about the herniated disc and the nerve compression and how serious the spinal injury was, and then he said something that made Dad's head turn toward me slowly. The doctor explained that I had carried Mom to the car and driven her to the emergency room, getting her here fast enough to prevent permanent nerve damage. Dad looked at me with this completely confused expression, his eyebrows scrunched together like he was trying to solve a really hard math problem in his head. Mom reached out and grabbed my hand, pulling me closer to the bed, and she said in this clear, firm voice that left no room for argument that I had saved her, and I could only do that because I'd been training properly at the gym. Dad opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out, and he just kept looking back and forth between me and Mom like he couldn't make sense of what he was hearing. The drive home felt like it took forever, even though it was only about 15 minutes from the hospital to our house. Nobody spoke except when Mom would wince and gasp every time we hit a bump or pothole in the road, and each time she made a sound of pain, my stomach would clench up with worry. I could feel Dad's eyes on me constantly through the rearview mirror, flicking up to look at me every few seconds, and then back to the road. When we finally pulled into our driveway, I helped Mom out of the car super carefully, supporting her weight exactly like I'd done at the hospital, and moving slowly so I wouldn't jostle her injured back. We got her settled on the living room couch with pillows arranged behind her back in the exact position the doctor had shown us, propping her up at just the right angle to take pressure off her spine. Dad stood there watching me work, not helping but not interfering either, just observing with this weird, intense focus. Once Mom was comfortable and had her pain medication and a glass of water within reach, Dad asked me to come talk with him in the kitchen. My stomach dropped instantly, and my heart started beating faster because I knew exactly what conversation was coming, and I'd been dreading it since the moment Mom asked if I'd been going to the gym. I started walking toward the kitchen, but Mom called out from the couch in this warning tone, telling Dad to be fair and remember what the doctor said about timing. Dad was already standing by the kitchen counter when I walked in, his arms crossed over his chest in that stance I knew so well from every argument we'd ever had. But his voice was quieter than I expected when he asked how long I'd been going to the gym and who had helped me do it. I took a deep breath and told him everything, the whole truth spilling out because there was no point in lying anymore. I explained about the 3 months of training, about how Kimberly's mom had added me to their family membership, about the 5:30 a.m. pickups every morning, and the gym clothes hidden in Kimberly's car, and the showers I took before coming home. Dad didn't interrupt me once while I talked, but I watched his jaw get tighter and tighter with each detail I shared. When I finished, he was silent for a really long moment, just staring at the kitchen floor, and then he said in this voice that was somehow worse than yelling that I had lied to them every single day for 3 months straight. The disappointment in his tone made my chest hurt way more than anger would have, like something heavy was pressing down on my ribs, making it hard to breathe properly. I tried to explain that I didn't want to lie, but I was watching my entire track career fall apart right in front of me. I told him about seeing my teammates get stronger and faster week after week while I stayed exactly the same. About the college scouts who used to email my coach asking about me, but stopped completely when my times got worse. I explained how helpless I felt being the only athlete on the team who couldn't follow the strength program, watching girls I used to beat easily start passing me in races. Dad listened without interrupting, but his jaw stayed tight and his arms stayed crossed, and when I finished talking, he said we were just trying to protect me from a dangerous environment, and I went behind their backs anyway. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say anything, Mom's voice came from the living room, louder and stronger than I expected given how much pain she was in. She said clearly that I went behind their backs because they weren't listening to my real needs as an athlete. I woke up super early the next morning out of pure habit. My body clock still set to 5:30 a.m. from months of gym sessions, and the house was completely quiet and dark. And I came downstairs and found Mom trying to get herself off the couch, her face twisted up in pain and frustration as she tried to push herself up with her arms. I rushed over and told her to stop moving and let me help her. I positioned myself next to the couch and used proper lifting technique, keeping my back straight and engaging my core muscles just like I'd learned, and I supported most of her weight as she slowly stood up. She leaned heavily against me, her arm around my shoulders and probably 60 or 70% of her weight pressing down on me, but I held her steady and strong. We moved inch by inch toward the bathroom, her taking tiny, careful steps while I matched her pace and kept her balanced. As we walked, she whispered that she never understood how strong I really was until right now, and there was something in her voice that sounded like regret mixed with pride, like she was sad and impressed at the same time. Over the next few days, I basically became Mom's full-time caregiver since Dad had to go back to work, and she couldn't do any basic tasks by herself without help. Every single morning, I helped her stand up from the couch or the bed, using the same careful lifting technique and body mechanics I'd learned at the gym. I supported her while she walked to the bathroom, helped her sit down on chairs, assisted her getting dressed because she couldn't bend or twist without terrible pain shooting through her back. I carried things she needed from room to room, brought her meals, helped her do the gentle stretching exercises the physical therapist had written down for her. Each time I lifted or supported her, I could see Mom watching me with this really thoughtful expression on her face, studying me like she was seeing me completely differently than she ever had before. It felt like she was thinking hard about everything she thought she knew about gyms and training, and what I was actually capable of handling on my own. On the third day after we got home from the hospital, someone knocked on our front door around lunchtime, and I looked through the peephole to see Kimberly's mom standing there holding a big glass casserole dish. I opened the door, and she gave me this sad smile, and said she brought food, and wanted to apologize for going behind my parents' backs, but she just couldn't watch them hold me back from reaching my full potential as an athlete. Dad came to the door right then, and took the casserole from her hands, and his voice was cold and stiff when he thanked her for the food, but said they needed to have a serious discussion about boundaries and respecting other people's parenting decisions. Before Kimberly's mom could respond or leave, Mom called out from the living room asking Dad to please invite her inside because she wanted to talk to her face to face. Dad's jaw clenched, but he stepped aside and let Kimberly's mom come in, and the tension in our living room was so thick and uncomfortable I could practically feel it pressing against my skin. Kimberly's mom sat down in the armchair across from the couch where Mom was lying, and she started explaining her whole perspective on the situation without any prompting. She told my parents she was a college athlete herself back in the day, that she ran track and did cross-country and understood exactly what kind of training serious competitors need. She said she'd watched her own daughter Kimberly grow and improve with proper strength training, and then she watched me struggling with inadequate bodyweight exercises that were never going to be enough for my level of competition. She looked directly at my parents and said their fears about gym culture were understandable as parents, but those fears were preventing me from getting basic athletic development that every serious competitor absolutely needs to succeed. Dad's voice started rising as he argued back that there are real dangers in gym environments, and she had absolutely no right to undermine their parenting or help their daughter lie to them for months. His words got louder with each sentence, but Mom just stayed quiet on the couch, watching and listening to everything without saying a word herself. After Kimberly's mom left about 30 minutes later, my parents went into their bedroom and closed the door firmly behind them. I could hear their voices going back and forth through the door, sometimes getting loud and sometimes dropping to quieter tones I couldn't make out clearly. I sat on the stairs feeling this awful mix of guilt for causing a fight between them, and frustration because Mom had almost ended up paralyzed for life just from carrying groceries, which never would have happened if she'd been strong enough to handle that weight safely. Their conversation went on for over an hour, their voices rising and falling in waves, and I stayed on those stairs the entire time with my stomach in knots. When they finally came out, Dad's face was set in these hard lines, and Mom looked completely exhausted and drained, and neither one of them said anything to me at all about what they'd decided or talked about. The next morning, Dad left for work without saying his usual goodbye to me, just grabbed his keys and walked out the door without even looking in my direction. After he was gone, Mom asked me to help her into the shower, which meant I had to support almost all of her weight while she carefully lifted one leg over the tub edge and then the other. I kept my back straight and my core tight, holding her steady while she moved at a snail's pace to avoid hurting herself worse. As I was helping her balance, she said quietly that my father wasn't actually angry at me. He was scared. She explained that he was realizing his rules had almost cost me the ability to help her when she needed it most, and he didn't know how to process that reality or deal with those feelings. I told her I understood why he was upset, but I was tired of being treated like I couldn't handle myself or make good decisions about my own athletic career and my own future. Mom finished in the shower and I helped her dry off and get dressed, moving slowly and carefully to avoid any sudden movements that might hurt her back. That evening, my phone rang with Coach's number showing on the screen and my stomach twisted up because I knew she'd be asking questions I didn't want to answer. I picked up and she asked why I'd missed the last 3 practices and if everything was okay at home. I explained about Mom's injury and how I was taking care of her because Dad had to work and she couldn't do basic things by herself yet. There was this long pause on the other end of the line, and then Coach asked how I got Mom to the hospital so fast when the injury happened. My mouth went dry because I knew where this was going. She said my parents had told her months ago that I wasn't allowed to do strength training, and she'd been wondering why my form had improved so much recently and why I was moving differently during practice. I took a deep breath and told her the whole truth about the secret gym sessions with Kimberly's family, expecting her to be mad or disappointed that I'd been lying to everyone. Instead, she said she knew something had changed in my training, and she could see it in how I moved, and we needed to talk about my program when I got back to practice. By the end of that first week at home, I'd figured out a routine for taking care of Mom that worked pretty well. Every morning, I helped her do the physical therapy exercises the hospital had given her, supporting her weight while she did gentle stretches and movements designed to help her back heal without making it worse. I'd help her walk short distances around the house, my arm around her waist and taking most of her weight while she took tiny, careful steps. I carried things from room to room for her, brought her meals, helped her sit down and stand up from chairs and the couch. Each day I was basically doing real-life strength training by helping another person move safely, and it hit me how useful and necessary this kind of strength actually was. Mom noticed it too, and one afternoon she said she'd never thought about gym training as preparation for real emergencies and taking care of people. She'd always just thought it was about looking good or improving sports performance. Dad came home from work one evening during the second week, carrying a stack of printed papers that he spread across the kitchen table without saying anything to me. I watched from the doorway as he sat down with a yellow highlighter and started reading through articles about gym safety and women's training programs and injury prevention research. He was marking sections with the highlighter, underlining parts about proper supervision and qualified trainers and safety rules. He didn't talk to me about what he was reading or why he was suddenly researching this stuff, but I could tell he was trying to educate himself instead of just reacting from fear like he'd always done before. It felt like maybe a tiny crack was forming in his wall of protective resistance, even though he still hadn't actually spoken to me directly about any of it. Kimberly showed up at our door during the middle of the second week with a big stack of homework from all my classes, and I could tell right away that something was wrong by how quiet she was acting. We went up to my room and sat on my bed, and she just stared at her hands for a while before finally telling me that her mom and my dad had a really tense phone conversation the day before. Dad had called and accused her mom of encouraging me to lie and deceive my parents and putting me at risk by giving me access to the gym behind their backs. I felt awful knowing that her family was dealing with problems because they'd helped me, and I told her I was so sorry for causing trouble between our parents. Kimberly said her mom didn't regret helping me at all, but things were awkward now between the families, and she didn't know how long it would take for that to get better. We sat there in uncomfortable silence for a while, both of us understanding that adult relationships and conflicts were way more complicated than we'd realized when we started this whole thing. Mom started going to physical therapy at a clinic twice a week, and I went with her to every appointment to help her get in and out of the car and support her during the exercises. Her physical therapist was this guy named Azariah Fontana, and he watched really carefully during the first session as I helped Mom move and supported her weight during different movements. He asked me if I had any training in body mechanics, or if I'd studied how to lift and support people safely. When I explained that I'd been doing strength training at a gym and learning proper form for squats and deadlifts and other exercises, his whole face lit up and he got really excited. He told Mom directly that proper strength training with weights was exactly what she needed for her own recovery once her back healed enough, that building muscle would help prevent future injuries and make her stronger and more stable. I watched Mom's face as she processed hearing a medical professional recommend the exact same thing she'd been forbidding me from doing for years. The team had a huge meet during the third week, and I had to miss it completely because Mom needed help all day and couldn't be left alone for the 6 or 7 hours it would take. I sat at home that evening refreshing the results page on my phone over and over, watching as my teammates' times got posted, and seeing that they'd done really well with lots of personal records and high placements. I scrolled through social media and saw posts about the college scout who used to email my coach being there watching races and taking notes. My stomach felt sick knowing that opportunity was slipping further away with each competition and practice I missed, wondering if I'd already lost my chance completely, even though I finally had access to proper training now. Dad finally sat down to talk to me directly one evening after Mom went to bed early because her back was hurting worse than usual. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and asked me to sit with him and said he'd been doing a lot of research and thinking hard about everything that happened. He admitted that his fears about gyms weren't really based on facts or statistics. They were more based on worst-case scenarios and isolated bad incidents he'd heard about from other people. But then he added that I still broke their trust by lying to them every single day for 3 whole months. And that was a separate issue from whether gym training was actually valuable or not, and he wasn't wrong about that even though it made me frustrated to hear it. The next day, Mom asked me to sit with her on the couch because she wanted to tell me something she'd never shared before. She said she ran track in high school just like me, and she was actually pretty good at it. Good enough that coaches noticed her and thought she had real potential. But her parents were really poor and couldn't afford any kind of training equipment or coaching or anything beyond just showing up to practice, so she never got to develop her abilities the way she could have. She got a small college scholarship to run track, but had to quit after just 1 semester because of money problems and family stuff that needed her attention more. There were actual tears in her eyes when she said she didn't want her fears to do to me what poverty had done to her, cutting off my dreams and chances before I even got a real opportunity to see how far I could go. By the time the 4th week rolled around, my body had changed a lot from all those months of training, and it was obvious even when I wore regular clothes. My arms and legs had visible muscle definition that hadn't been there before, and my shoulders looked broader and stronger. Dad noticed when I was helping Mom stand up from the couch one afternoon, and he made a comment about how different I looked. Not in an angry way, but almost surprised, like he was seeing me as a capable athlete for the first time, instead of just his little girl who needed protection from everything. Mom said clearly that I looked strong because I actually was strong now, and that strength had literally saved her life, and we couldn't just ignore that reality because it made us uncomfortable to admit we'd been wrong. An email notification popped up on my phone one morning from Horatio Rowland, the college scout who'd shown interest in me last year, but stopped responding completely when my race times got worse. He was reaching out because my coach had told him about my situation and my recent training, and he wanted to know if I was still interested in their program and when I'd be competing again. My hands were actually shaking as I read it, because this was exactly the opportunity I thought I'd lost forever and given up on. But now I was weeks behind in training, and Mom still needed my help every single day, so I had no idea how to respond, or if I could realistically get back into competitive shape in time for him to see me race again. Extended thinking. I stared at the email for probably 5 full minutes, reading it over and over again to make sure I wasn't imagining what Horatio Rowland had actually written, my hands gripping my phone so tight my knuckles turned white and my thumbs kept accidentally tapping the screen. That evening after dinner, I asked my parents if we could all sit down together in the living room, because I needed to talk to them about something really important that couldn't wait any longer, my voice coming out more serious than I'd planned, but I needed them to understand this was about my entire future. Mom was still moving slowly and carefully because her back wasn't fully healed yet, so I helped her get settled on the couch with pillows supporting her spine before Dad and I sat down in the chairs across from her. I pulled up the email on my phone and handed it to Dad, watching his face as he read through Horatio Rowland's message, asking about my current race times and upcoming meet schedule, and saying his program was still very interested in me. Dad's eyebrows went up and he passed the phone to Mom, who read it twice before looking back at me with this expression I couldn't quite figure out. I explained the whole situation as clearly as I could, telling them about the training timeline I'd already missed, the weeks I'd lost, while taking care of Mom and how I needed their actual support and real permission to train properly if I was going to have any shot at earning a college scholarship that could help pay for my education. Dad opened his mouth like he was about to launch into another one of his protective speeches, but Mom held up her hand and cut him off before he could get a single word out. She said we needed to find a real solution that would address his legitimate safety concerns while also supporting my athletic needs and giving me a fair chance to reach my potential. And the way she looked at me when she said it made me realize for the first time that she was completely and totally on my side now, that saving her life had changed everything between us. The next day, Dad did something I never in a million years expected him to do, something that shocked me so much I literally had to sit down when Mom told me what was happening. He drove to the gym where I'd been training for those 3 months and asked the staff if he could get a tour of the whole facility, wanting to see the actual environment with his own eyes instead of just imagining worst-case scenarios based on Facebook stories and fear. Kimberly's mom met him there because apparently they'd arranged the whole thing together without telling me anything about it. And she walked him through every section of the building, introduced him to the trainers and staff members who worked there, showed him the women's-only area, and the different training spaces where I'd been working out. When he came home that evening, his face looked different, quieter and more thoughtful than usual, and he told me the place seemed way more professional and safety-focused than he'd imagined it would be, with actual rules and supervision and qualified people monitoring everything. He wasn't ready to make any final decisions yet, and I could tell he was still processing everything he'd seen, and trying to figure out how he felt about it all, but at least he'd taken the step of looking for himself instead of just refusing based on fear. 2 days later, my parents called me into the living room again and told me to sit down, because they had something important to discuss with me, and my stomach twisted up with nervousness because I had no idea if this was going to be good news or more restrictions. They'd come up with a proposal that would let me continue gym training, but with a whole bunch of conditions attached that we'd all have to follow without exception. The rules included only going during staffed hours when trainers and employees were present, checking in with them by text before, and after every single session so they knew I was safe, and maintaining complete and total honesty about my schedule and activities with absolutely no more lying or sneaking around. Dad looked me straight in the eyes and said the lying had hurt him way more than the actual gym attendants ever could have, that breaking their trust was the real problem we needed to fix, and rebuilding that trust would require total transparency from this point forward, with no exceptions or excuses. It wasn't the complete freedom I'd been hoping for and dreaming about, but it was real permission and legitimate access to proper training, which felt like a huge victory even though it came with strings attached and conditions I'd have to follow. The very next day, I went over to Kimberly's house to thank her mom properly and apologize for all the tension and conflict my situation had caused between our families over the past few weeks. She opened the door and immediately pulled me into this long, tight hug that lasted probably 30 seconds, telling me she'd do it all over again in a heartbeat if she had to, because she believed I deserved a real chance. She explained that sometimes adults have to make really hard choices about helping kids, even when it creates serious conflict with other adults, and she genuinely believed I deserved an opportunity to develop my abilities and reach my potential as an athlete. Then she showed me a text message on her phone that my dad had sent her that morning, a long paragraph apologizing for his harsh words and angry phone call, and thanking her for caring about my future even when it made things difficult. Both of us were kind of surprised by how quickly he'd come around and reached out to make things right, and I could tell the awkwardness between our families was starting to ease up and get better, though things definitely weren't completely back to normal yet, and probably wouldn't be for a while. Returning to team practice felt absolutely amazing and incredibly nerve-wracking at exactly the same time, with my teammates crowding around me asking where I'd been and why I'd missed so much training, and if everything was okay at home. Coach pulled me aside after warm-ups and said she was creating a special modified program designed specifically to help me catch up safely without risking injury from jumping back into full training too fast after being away. She also mentioned something that made my throat get tight with emotion, telling me she'd actually told Horatio Rowland about my whole situation, because she believed in me and thought he deserved to know the full context of why my performance had dropped and what I'd been dealing with. That kind of advocacy from her meant absolutely everything to me right then, knowing she'd gone out of her way to protect my future opportunities. My first official gym session with my parents' actual knowledge and real permission felt completely and totally different from all those secret morning workouts I'd been doing for months, like someone had lifted this massive weight off my shoulders that went way beyond just the barbells I was lifting. I didn't have to hide gym clothes in Kimberly's car anymore, or worry about smelling like the weight room when I got home, or lie about where I'd been and what I'd been doing with my time. Kimberly worked out right next to me just like before, but now we were laughing and taking silly photos and acting like totally normal teenagers, instead of constantly looking over our shoulders and sneaking around like we were doing something wrong. The freedom of honesty and openness felt so much better than I'd ever expected it would, better than the training itself in some ways. 6 weeks after her injury, Mom reached a really major recovery milestone when she walked independently across our living room without any support for the very first time since that terrible day in the kitchen, taking small, careful steps while Dad and I stood there watching nervously and holding our breath. Azariah had told us at the beginning that this kind of progress would take at least 2 full months of physical therapy and recovery time, so she was actually ahead of schedule by a couple weeks, partly because of all the therapy work, but also partly because she'd been so motivated to regain her independence and not have to rely on us for every little thing. We celebrated that night with takeout dinner from her favorite restaurant, and Mom joked that she was going to start training with me at the gym once she got fully cleared by her doctor, which made Dad laugh out loud even though I was pretty sure she was actually being serious about it. Coach and I sat down together to discuss realistic goals for what was left of the season, looking carefully at my current fitness level and the amount of time remaining before championships in a few weeks. She was completely honest with me that I wouldn't be at my absolute peak performance level by then, but with consistent smart training, I could get pretty close to where I'd been before the long plateau, and way more importantly, I'd be positioned really well going into my senior year with a solid foundation. We mapped out this whole periodized plan with specific benchmarks I needed to hit each week, and having a clear path forward with actual professional guidance made the goal feel totally achievable instead of overwhelming and impossible like it had felt before. My first meetback was just a small invitational at a nearby school. Nothing major or important. But I was incredibly nervous anyway because I hadn't raced in over a month, and I really needed to prove to myself that I could still actually compete at this level. My time wasn't anywhere close to a personal record, but it was respectable and solid and showed clear improvement from where I'd been before the secret training had even started months ago. More importantly than the actual time on the clock, I felt strong and controlled during the entire race instead of just barely surviving it. and hoping to finish, and my legs had real power all the way through the finish line that they definitely didn't have back when I was only doing bodyweight exercises in my bedroom. Mom and Dad both came to watch the meet, standing together in the bleachers with all the other parents from different schools. And I could see them cheering and clapping when I crossed the finish line, even though I was breathing too hard to really focus on them during the race itself. After I'd cooled down and caught my breath, Dad came over and wrapped me up in this big hug, telling me he was genuinely proud of how I'd handled everything over these past few months, both the athletic comeback and the complicated family situation, showing maturity that went way beyond my 17 years. Mom added that watching me compete with proper training and seeing what I could actually do made her realize for the first time what I was truly capable of achieving. And she was really sorry they'd held me back for so long based on fears instead of actual facts about what I needed. 2 weeks after that meet, my phone buzzed with a new email notification while I was sitting in the school cafeteria during lunch period. And when I saw Horatio Rowland's name in my inbox, my hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone on the table. He was asking for my current race times and my upcoming meet schedule, saying his program was still really interested in me and wanted to stay in touch throughout my entire senior year to see how I continued developing as an athlete. I wrote back immediately with all the information he requested, attaching my recent race results and the full competition calendar Coach had given me. And I made sure to thank him for not giving up on me even though my performance had dropped so badly during that awful period when I couldn't train properly. Coach pulled me aside after practice that same day and told me that having a college scout actively following my progress and staying in regular contact put me in a really strong position for recruitment down the line. She explained that if I kept improving consistently through my senior year the way I'd been improving these past few weeks, a real scholarship offer was totally realistic and achievable, not just some impossible dream anymore. The future I'd thought was completely lost and gone forever was suddenly opening back up right in front of me, like a door I'd watched slam shut was slowly creaking open again to show me possibilities I'd given up on. 3 months after Mom's injury, our whole family had settled into this new normal that felt strange and comfortable at the same time, where I trained openly at the gym 4 times every week without any sneaking around or lying about where I was going. I helped Mom with her continued recovery exercises in our living room most evenings, supporting her during stretches and movements that were getting easier for her each week as her back healed and strengthened. Dad still worried sometimes, and I could see it in his face when I left for the gym, but he'd learned to trust my judgment about safety, and he was starting to understand that proper preparation was actually way safer than trying to prohibit everything out of fear. Mom was walking completely normally again without any pain or limitations, and she'd started talking seriously about beginning her own strength training program once she got full clearance from Azariah, which made me smile every time she brought it up. I wasn't at the very top of my team yet in terms of performance and times, but I was improving steadily every single week and closing the gap with the faster girls who'd pulled ahead of me during those lost months. More importantly than any race time or ranking, I'd proven to myself and my family that the strength I'd built through training wasn't just about running faster or jumping higher. It was about being genuinely capable and prepared when the people I loved needed real help in an emergency. Life wasn't perfect or ideal by any stretch, but it was honest now with open communication and trust, and that honesty made all the difference in how our family functioned together.